Loud, bold, aggressive. When you think of an anime character with these traits, someone that always comes to mind is Katsuki Bakugo, the explosion boy with anger issues. I mean, how could you not? He surely has a rather unique personality. His strong determination is one of the few positive traits you could make out in the beginning of the show, but it's quickly overshadowed by overconfidence, recklessness, and insensitivity towards others. So how does it come that this character, who isn't exactly what you would call likable in the beginning, turns out to be one of the most popular characters in the entire show? Why would a character who advises others to go kill themselves develop such a massive fanbase and be the undefeated king of every popularity poll? Since 2016, Bakugo holds the top spot in the popularity polls in both Japan and the US. And whether you're part of the big mess or a certified hater, this phenomenon certainly deserves attention. So let's dive deeper into his character and find out why Katsuki Bakugo is so popular. When we look at the first chapters of the manga or the first episode, we can see that Bakugo is actually the first antagonistic character we are introduced to. The very first scene begins with little Deku crying and trying to protect a boy behind him. In the very next shot, we already see Bakugo and his friends towering over him. And not only that, despite his quirk being one of the first ones we actually get to see in the series, it's also shown in a way that doesn't exactly portray quirks in a positive light. Bakugo immediately attacks Deku with his explosion quirk and remains the victor in this little confrontation. Meaning, from the very beginning, we are shown that quirks are something that differentiates people and makes some of them better than others, and that those who have quirks are the victors. And all of that is shown to us through a single character, Bakugo. As the story progresses, this characterization is only emphasized further. Bakugo is shown to be the first antagonistic force that wants to stop Deku, the main character, from achieving his dreams. In school, he makes clear that he is not like others and superior to the rest of his classmates. At the ripe age of 14, he already has established his goal. He wants to surpass All Might and become the highest ranking hero in the world. When Deku replies that he has the same dream, Bakugo immediately attacks him with an explosion and makes him aware of his inferiority, since he has a quirk and Deku doesn't. But it doesn't end with that. When Bakugo finds out about Deku actually taking his dream seriously, he blows up his notebook, stating that he will be the only one who will go to UA in order to become a hero. The scene ends with Bakugo advising Deku to take his own life, so he can be reborn as a hero in his next life. At this point, even Bakugo's friends think that he has gone too far and try to encourage Deku a bit. Bakugo, on the other hand, doesn't show any mercy or remorse and blames Deku for getting in his way. Up until this point, Bakugo is shown as the typical school bully who mocks Deku and makes sure to deprive him of the very last confidence he has, so that he certainly won't go to UA. Deku is clearly afraid of him and doesn't have the courage to stand up for himself. Bakugo shows no signs of empathy and fuels his own self-confidence with his superiority over others. Later in the series, we actually get to see the reason for this worldview of his. He was born naturally gifted and early came to the conclusion that since he can do things others can't do, he must be better than them. And this superiority complex of him resulted in him wanting to become the best hero and the only one to go to UA. And since his entire confidence and self-worth was based on his superiority so early on, he tries to eliminate any upcoming competition as fast as possible. And he doesn't hold back. So far, Bakugo wants to be the best, and he wants to be the only one to be the best, and doesn't care about the surroundings or the feelings of others in the slightest. From an audience's point of view, he simply hates Deku and wants to stop him from achieving his dream. Up until now, there are no reasons for liking him, relating to him, feeling sympathy for him, or whatever reasons people have to declare a character to be their favorite. So when does it begin that people actually begin to like him, despite there being every reason not to? Where does it start that people start to defend and root for a character that tells another to commit suicide? In order to find the answer for that, we have to answer another question first. What is it exactly that makes someone like a character? Think about that for a second and then pause the video and write your answer in the comments. Most of the time, it's strong similarity to themselves. We like to see strong emotions on screen, because oftentimes emotions are not something that's often talked about or easy to explain. We often don't even know why we are feeling a certain emotion or mistake it for another. But we as humans have the urge to understand ourselves, and therefore we turn to fictional characters, because we see a similarity in the way they express their emotions. Humans are flawed. We don't want to admit it, but secretly we want to be understood in our flaws. So far, Bakugo hasn't shown any sign of a flaw or weakness. In fact, his entire personality revolves around being the strongest and being perfect. And perfect people have no flaws. So, what exactly is Bakugo's flaw? If we want to answer that question, we need to take a look into the scene where Bakugo gets attacked by the slime villain. From a simple storytelling perspective, the point of that scene is very clear. After Deku's failed attempt of meeting All Might, a scene was needed where he can prove that he is worth of being a hero, despite not having a quirk. And what is the core trait of a hero in Deku's and in All Might's eyes? A hero saves people. And in order to show that Deku is really serious with saving people, who's a better fit for that than the person known for hating and bullying him, his arch-enemy Bakugo? What is more selfless than sacrificing your life for your enemy? So, from a storytelling perspective, it's absolutely clear that Bakugo is the one who needs to be saved here. But what does that mean for Bakugo? In order to get an idea of what Bakugo thinks and feels in the scene, we need to look at a specific quote. When Bakugo asked, "Why are you here?" Deku answers, "Because your face seemed to be calling for help." After these words, All Might saw that Deku possesses the true qualities of a hero and got enough inspired to save him. So, from a storytelling perspective, these words were directed towards All Might, to move All Might and make him rethink what it truly means to be a hero. But it still tells us something important about Bakugo, because Bakugo didn't like to be saved by Deku at all. Why? Because by letting Deku save him, he not only admits his own weakness, he also has to acknowledge that Deku is more useful than he makes him believe. In fact, Bakugo is so mad about that he actually confronts Deku later on. He states that he never asked Deku for help, and that he didn't need to be saved, that he could handle the slime monster on his own. This tells us something important about Bakugo. He not only thinks that needing help is a sign of weakness, he also thinks that being perceived as weak is even worse. Bakugo actually is a pretty realistic character. He isn't dumb. He knows when he doesn't stand a chance against a stronger opponent. But what he can't stand is when people see that he is struggling. And that is exactly what Deku does, and explains why Bakugo hates him so much. Because Deku sees the feelings and insecurities that Bakugo tries to hide, and no one likes to be confronted with their feelings in such a way. The fact that it was more being perceived as weak instead of actually getting saved is what bugged Bakugo the most, can be seen in the lack of such a confrontation towards All Might. Bakugo could have been mad at All Might for saving him, but he didn't. Why? Because saving people is a hero's job, Bakugo doesn't deny that. But being seen as needing help, that's where Bakugo draws the line. So, to come back to our previous question, what is it exactly that makes someone like a character? Relating to them and being confronted with our own flaws in a distant way. And that's exactly what happens in this scene. Bakugo was confronted with him needing help. But the point of that scene was not to show Bakugo's weakness. It more used Bakugo as an example to show Deku's strength. Yes, we see Bakugo struggling and maybe begin to understand him a bit, but this scene is not enough to make the audience root for him. After all, he is still seen as the school bully that can't stand Deku. So far, Bakugo had been a really one-dimensional character. His role in the story was fulfilled. Deku decided to not let Bakugo destroy his dream and got accepted into UA. It would have been no problem for Horikoshi to just drop his character and make him a side character since its function in the story and his catalyzing role for Deku was fulfilled. But instead, something really interesting and unusual happens now, and I think that is the main reason why Bakugo became such a fan favorite. But first, let's take a look into what happened when Deku entered UA. When Deku enters UA, it seems like all his problems are solved entirely. He can become a hero. He meets new friends like Ida and talks to girls like Ochako. And his long-life bully Katsuki Bakugo finally ignores him. But then Bakugo ends up in the same class as Deku. And Deku needs to prove once again that he has what it takes to become a hero, because just by entering UA his problems are unsolved. At this point, the direction of the story seems pretty clear. Bakugo stays in his role as the mean bully and serves as an obstacle that Deku has to overcome in order to grow as a hero. A good old rival brings some drama to the story after all and keeps it interesting. Bakugo still seems like a pretty generic character, but that changes with the Hero Ability Assessment test. So far, Bakugo's entire character served as an obstacle for Deku, as well as a catalyst to develop him further. Notice Bakugo for Deku, not the other way around. Well, that perspective changes when we get to the quirk assessment test, and Bakugo sees Deku's quirk for the first time. Bakugo is absolutely shocked. He is furious. He can't quite comprehend that Deku has a quirk now. And now, at this point of the series, we finally get to see Bakugo's perspective for the first time. We get to see what Deku is to him, how he describes Deku as a pebble on the road, someone he overlooked the whole time. We as the audience begin to realize that Bakugo is much more than just a side character crafted for Deku's character development. In fact, we are introduced very early, in chapter 7 to be exact, to Bakugo's whole view on the events. Of course, he is still an important character for Deku's character development, but he is also his own character, with his own wishes, goals, and flaws. And since that is introduced so early to us, and not just in form of a tragic flashback later where we get to see the villain side of the story, we actually get to see his character development and get a chance to not only watch him grow, but to see another perspective on Deku's growth. By that, the story gets so much richer and takes away the one-sided perspective that comes with Deku being the main character. And by that, the fundament for Bakugo's character development was established. The audience now knows that Bakugo is a character that is worth their attention, and those who weren't really interested in Deku so far have probably decided now that Bakugo's reaction and his side of the story is more interesting to watch than Deku's character growth. But just because Bakugo checks all the requirements needed for becoming a well-rounded character doesn't mean he has to become one. After all, Deku is the main character, and from now on, since the story is at its very beginning, all the focus must lay on Deku and his growth and... Wait, how about no? The first fight between Deku and Bakugo is interesting for many reasons. First of all, it's their first fight. Deku will now not only have to prove mentally, but also physically, that he can win against Bakugo. It's also their first fight with quirks. And it's written from Bakugo's point of view. Yes, you've heard that right. The very first fight involving Deku, that should be from Deku's POV for many reasons, is actually from Bakugo's perspective. Instead of focusing on Deku being able to handle All for One and use it in battle, it focuses more on Bakugo's reactions and how his worldview changes now that he knows that Deku has a quirk. But let's take a look into what happens in this scene. It starts from Deku's perspective, who is aware of the fact that Bakugo will probably come right at him. But this time, Deku promises himself to not falter and take him on. When the fight starts, Deku immediately shows that it's serious to him and uses the knowledge from his previous analysis to predict Bakugo's moves and get a head start in the fight. And of course, Bakugo is not happy about that, and Deku needs to flee. And now something interesting happens. the perspective of the fight switches to Bakugo. While hunting down Deku, Bakugo remembers his childhood and how he always made fun of Deku for being weaker than him, and he felt even more superior when he learned that Deku has no quirk. Bakugo painfully realizes now that he has underestimated him, since Deku has a quirk now and is not as weak anymore as he seemed to be. And of course, Bakugo gets mad because his fragile ego that stemmed from him being so much better than everyone is slowly crumbling. For the first time in his life, Bakugo is not miles ahead of everyone. But that's not the only thing. We also get to see another flashback from Bakugo's point of view. We see Bakugo as a child leading the Bakugo agency and crossing a fallen tree over a river. Bakugo is confidently leading the group when he suddenly slips and falls into the water. The other kids ask him jokingly if he were okay, and then state that he will be alright since he's tough. Deku, on the other hand, goes up to him and asks him if he was okay, lending him his hand with a worried expression on his face. Now what if I tell you that this little scene is the most important scene in the entire show regarding Bakugo's character development, and with that, the reason for his likability? And we have to understand this scene if we want to understand Bakugo's character. Because that scene itself was not unusual. It was Bakugo's interpretation, that is. So first of all, let's take a look at the reaction of Bakugo's friends. They aren't helping him, but are already assuming that he will be alright. This is exactly how Bakugo wants to be seen. Superior to everyone, a person that is so great that even setbacks like this won't stop him or have others lose their faith in him. And then we have Deku, who immediately goes up to him and worries about him. In Bakugo's eyes, having someone worry about him is a sign of weakness. It means that someone doesn't acknowledge him as superior. This becomes even more obvious when we look at the flashback in the scene after that, where we see Deku saying that Bakugo's eyes were pleading for help, and Bakugo responds immediately by saying that he's above him. For Bakugo, only those who are superior to him have the right to worry about him, which is one of the reasons why he didn't get mad at All Might for saving him from the slime villain. So by Deku asking if he was okay, Deku puts himself above Bakugo. This little scene gave us an even deeper insight into Bakugo's messed up worldview and his twisted view of superiority. But the most important thing in this scene is that it was a memory from Bakugo's early childhood, meaning he's seen the world like that already at such a young age. That means that his worldview is ingrained to him really deeply, and is therefore going to be even more difficult to change. Well, don't we all love Bakugo because he does exactly that? But it's still too early for that, because in order to change yourself, you first have to recognize your weaknesses. And that's exactly what happens now, when Bakugo has his first breakdown. So, the first fight between Deku and Bakugo ended with Deku winning. But this loss actually means so much more to Bakugo than just losing a fight. In Bakugo's eyes, it's not the fact that Deku was stronger than him that made him lose the fight, but the fact that he himself was too weak. Bakugo came into UA thinking that he's the best and no one could beat him, and now his expectations were shattered. Because it's not only Deku who got stronger. Bakugo had to realize that even the other students, like Todoroki or Momo, are forced to be reckoned with. Suddenly, he's not the best anymore. And who is the person he blames for that, the person he directs all his anger onto? That's himself. It's always dangerous to base your self-worth on external things you barely have any control over. And in Bakugo's case, he bases his worth on becoming the best, and his own definition of strength, that he has ingrained deeply into his personality. And this causes him to become incredibly narrow-minded. This narrow-minded definition of strength, paired with his desperation and crumbling self-worth, sends Bakugo on a dangerous path, and the upcoming sports festival only fuels this limited mindset. The UA Sports Festival. The first image that pops in your mind when you think of this arc is probably Todoroki finally using his flames for the first time. And while I have to admit that Todoroki stole the entire show, the UA Sports Festival actually consists of some interesting and important moments regarding not only Todoroki's, but also Bakugo's character development. Even though they probably went unnoticed because of Todoroki's tragic backstory. Anyways, that's what I'm here for. Bakugo, your time to shine. The first scene we have to take a look at is Bakugo's roaring declaration of victory. Bakugo, as we know him, doesn't have any encouraging words for his class, but instead boldly declares that he will win that thing and will place first. As expected, his classmates are not happy about that, and Tetsu even describes him as overconfident. But this time, there's something about the way Bakugo presents himself that's quite unusual. While declaring his upcoming victory, Bakugo doesn't smile once, and his entire expression and tone is dead serious. Deku notices that behavior and states to himself that Bakugo could hardly be described as overconfident, because if he were, he would declare his victory with a wide grin. But this time, Bakugo doesn't smile. So why does he not smile? Well, we actually know the reason for that. After seeing what his classmates were capable of, Bakugo's ego is cracking, and now he's desperately trying to fix it. According to Bakugo, his old self-confidence will be restored again if he wins the sport festival, because then he can proudly say again, and this time with evidence, that he's better than everyone. But, as we already know, it never works out like that, because true change comes from within. If you are unhappy with the way you look, you won't suddenly love yourself by losing or gaining weight. You have to change your mindset. And that is also what Bakugo needs. He needs to realize that he can't base his entire self-worth on winning. But it's still too early in the story for a realization like that. During the sports festival, Bakugo immediately takes action and doesn't hesitate to live up to his promise. But the moment where we can really see how messed up and self-destructive his mindset is during the 1-versus-1 fights in the last round. And especially his fight with Ochako is worth looking into, and not because of the reasons you may think. At first, when this fight is announced, it sounds like a joke. Katsuki Bakugo versus Uraraka Ochako? Are you serious? This sounds like it's going to be the most one-sided fight ever. Except the fact that it isn't. And that's where things get interesting. If it was the old Bakugo we were talking about, the one whose ego wasn't broken already, he would have absolutely and recklessly destroyed Ochako, without any consideration whatsoever. But now he can't allow himself to act reckless, because this time he has to prove something to himself. This time it's serious to him. And that means he can't let his guard down and has to analyze every opponent and fight at his full strength. And he's especially guarded against Ochako, because he knows she's Deku's friend and he lost against Deku before. Therefore, losing against Ochako, who uses Deku's tactics, would be like admitting his defeat against Deku, and that would be the worst possible outcome for Bakugo. Therefore, the only possibility is to take this fight seriously. But it goes even further than that. Bakugo also expects his opponent, Ochako, to take the fight seriously. He respects her and expects her to respect him as well. That becomes even more obvious when we look at the reaction of his classmates. Denki is shocked, how he can treat a girl so much weaker than him like that. And even some of the pro heroes get angry at Bakugo for toying with her. But it's Aizawa who understands what actually happens and correctly assumes that Bakugo clearly recognizes the strength of an opponent who reached this far, and that it's because he's doing everything in his power to win that he's refusing to let his guard down. This becomes especially obvious after the fight when Bakugo finds out that it actually wasn't Deku's plan, but Ochako's plan she herself developed. His classmates are mad at him for going all out on a fragile little girl, but Bakugo actually defends her by saying, "Where do you see fragile?" Bakugo clearly respects her and recognizes her strength, because he actually wants this fight to be equal. He wants to say at the end that he actually won this fight while everyone was fighting at their full strength. If Bakugo didn't take Ochako seriously, she also wouldn't have taken him seriously, and Bakugo wouldn't count that as a win. Because he doesn't want to win just for the sake of winning, no matter what. No, He wants to win in order to prove to himself that he is strong and worthy. These are two very different mindsets, and that causes Bakugo to change his stance regarding his opponent. Even though Bakugo respected her out of somewhat selfish intentions, it's still remarkable to see a character like him recognizing Ochako's strength. It earned him respect. It was refreshing and surprising to see Bakugo actually having morals, and not being a total misogynist out of a hunger for power. The way he handled that fight and his view of Ochako made him more likable, especially because he could have acted so differently with such a goal in mind. Now let's take a look at what happened in the fight between Bakugo and Todoroki. In order to understand that fight, we need to know that Todoroki was one of the people that Bakugo deemed to be stronger than him. Therefore, from Bakugo's perspective, when he can beat Todoroki in the final round, he will be the best hero and his confidence will be restored. Due to the promise Bakugo made to himself, he became extremely narrow-minded, and this fight shows beautifully how that backfires at him now. Bakugo is so focused on winning that he entirely forgets his surroundings. He only categorizes the world into strength and weakness, and turns a blind eye on every other possible factor. That is precisely what makes him interpret Todoroki not using his flames as him being too weak to use them on. Bakugo is so focused on winning that he begins to see the entire world like that. That is the reason he doesn't realize Todoroki's mental state, which plays a huge role in his fight and his outcome. After his fight with Deku, Todoroki is extremely confused on why he used his fire and how he felt while using it, and needs some time to reflect on that. That's why he takes a distance now in the fight and goes back to safe, already familiar patterns, which in his case is his ice quirk. That's what he feels most comfortable with. Bakugo, on the other hand, sees Todoroki not using his fire on him as a personal attack and thinks he's not strong enough, that, in Todoroki's eyes, he's not a worthy opponent. That's why Bakugo wants Todoroki to use his full power against him, because for Bakugo, there is no meaning to beating him if he doesn't want to use his full power. His quote, "How can I prove myself if I defeat you so easily?" shows beautifully how high the standards and expectations are that Bakugo has placed on himself. This becomes painfully obvious when we take a look at the award ceremony. Bakugo is chained up on the winner's podium, absolutely furious. His quote, "Even if society acknowledges that I'm the winner, if I don't then it's trash," just shows that Bakugo didn't want to actually win. He wanted to restore his confidence. At the beginning of the UA Sports Festival, he made the promise to win, but now that he achieved that goal, it didn't give him the outcome he wanted. Bakugo had to painfully realize that he just won't become a more confident person by changing his surroundings. True change comes from within. And the reason Bakugo is still so unhappy, even after he scored the first place, is because his mindset is still the same as before. Bakugo still evaluates people's worth based on their strength, and subconsciously expects others to do the same. That's why he was so mad that Todoroki didn't use his flames, because in Bakugo's eyes, the reason for that is that Todoroki saw him as weak. As we know, there were a lot of reasons that caused Todoroki to rely on his ice quirk in the final battle, and we also know that Bakugo is smart enough to figure that out. But, as Deku said at the beginning, Bakugo is deliberately cornering himself. He wants to evaluate people like that, because that gives him a scale on which he can prove his own worth. At this moment, Bakugo became the victim of his own mindset. And this mental battle, the realization that the thing we thought will fix all of our problems actually doesn't, is probably relatable for all of us. That's why this scene, and especially the award ceremony, was so soul-crushing to watch, because everyone knows the feeling of not being able to live up to our own expectations. We all have problems that we blame on external circumstances, instead of searching for the problem within ourselves, where it lies oftentimes. We begin to feel bad for Bakugo in the sports festival, because we as the audience already know that the way Bakugo chooses to overcome his flaws is the wrong one. We want this character to succeed and overcome his problems, but we want him to do it in a healthy way. But as the saying goes, no pain, no growth. That's why there's still a long way to go for Bakugo in order to overcome his self-hatred. At this point in the story, we need to talk about All Might and what he means to Bakugo. I think it's no surprise that Bakugo looks up to All Might. Everyone does. He is the number one hero after all. But in order to pinpoint why All Might losing his strength in the Battle of Kamino was so incredibly gruesome and shattering for Bakugo, we need to understand the lens through which Bakugo sees All Might. As we know, Bakugo values strength. His entire self-worth stems from him always being the strongest, the best, the one that never gives up and wins every fight. And that worldview of his is embodied by All Might. Since he was a kid, Bakugo looked up to All Might. He is his role model. He is the one that sparked Bakugo's flame. He is the root of Bakugo's goal-oriented mindset. But he is also the limit of his dreams. During the sports festival arc, Bakugo forgets about that reason entirely. He was so focused on winning and desperately trying to prove himself that he completely forgot what the reason was that made him want to win in the first place. In order to realize his flaws and find a proper way to deal with them, Bakugo needs to be reminded of why he even wanted to become a hero in the first place and what it meant to him. But to realize that, Bakugo also needs a catalyst that forces him to get reminded of that. And the fight of Deku and Bakugo versus All Might combines these two things perfectly. But first of all, can we please have a moment of appreciation for the title? Bakugo Katsuki Origin is such a well-fitting title because it literally shows us Bakugo's origin, not only because we get to see flashbacks in Bakugo's backstory, but because in this episode Bakugo himself finds back to his origin, to the one thing that sparked his wish to become a hero, the thing that he completely forgot before. So, let me ask you, what is Bakugo's biggest fear? It's not living up to his own expectations, and therefore not being the strongest. So, you can imagine how horrible it must be for him to see the person he always belittled becoming slowly and steadily stronger. Which is exactly what happens, of course. During his internship with Gran Torino, Deku establishes a shoot style that allows him to become faster and stronger than before. He went from the kid with the superpower that breaks all his fingers to the hero that uses every chance to become stronger and will eventually surpass everyone. Right after Bakugo was humiliated by Todoroki not using his flames, and therefore deeming him as weak, the one person he never really saw as competition catches up to him and is stronger than ever before. At this point, it must have felt like the entire world was against him. This is why, during the fight where he is forced to team up with Deku, Bakugo ignores Deku entirely, since his ego doesn't allow him to get any help from him, since then he would have to admit that he's weaker than Deku. Therefore, Bakugo's plan consists of beating All Might alone, without Deku interfering. At this point, Bakugo is completely avoidant of any constructive criticism, especially when it comes from Deku. He denies any logical argument and behaves incredibly irrational, trying to win against All Might in a desperate attempt to save that little of his ego that is still there. But naturally, Bakugo doesn't get far with that, and after hindering Deku and Deku hindering him, due to the lack of teamwork and getting punched by All Might, Bakugo eventually realizes that his strength won't be enough to win against an opponent like All Might, and decides it would be better to lose altogether than relying on Deku's strength or letting him help him. Bakugo has reached a point where his fear of being perceived as weak and accepting help is stronger than his will to win the fight. Yes, Bakugo still wants to win and become the best in the world, but even he realizes that there are people who are stronger than him, and that thought of not being able to win against someone due to their natural strength is easier for him to bear than the thought of being seen or perceived as inferior. Let that sink in. He would rather be defeated than admitting Deku's strength and therefore his own weakness. But then Deku knocks some sense into him, figuratively and literally, and shouts at him, "Don't say you'd rather lose, you of all people." He asks Bakugo why he didn't try to use him before he's giving up, and that aren't you the kid who never gives up on winning? This quote is followed by a series of flashbacks that show Deku's admiration towards Bakugo. The reason why Bakugo then decided to team up with Deku to get a hold on All Might is because Deku's words reminded him of his own admiration towards All Might. Didn't Bakugo want to become exactly that? Someone who never gives up on winning? Isn't that the very reason why he wanted to become a hero in the first place? This is the moment where Bakugo's pride and his inner promise to be a hero like All Might become stronger than his egoistic approach to winning and his hate towards Deku, and he willingly teams up with him under the cover of using him to take All Might down. But even this plan doesn't work, and All Might catches up to them. He crashes Bakugo to the ground. Bakugo realizes that All Might is far stronger than him, and that he won't have a chance against him. But at the same time, he can't help but feel amazed at that. Isn't that true, unstoppable strength everything he ever wanted? Isn't that the very reason why he chose to become a hero? A flame of hope awakens in him, and he shouts that there was no way he could ever beat All Might without taking any risks. Those risks are not only referring to the fact that Bakugo blasts his explosion without protectors, they also hold a symbolic meaning. Bakugo takes a risk the moment he decided to trust Deku and let him pass the gate alone. He realizes that this step is necessary on his way to become a hero as strong as All Might. One thing that often gets overlooked in My Hero Academia is the fact that Bakugo has an admiration to All Might in an equal intensity as Deku. It's just that Deku looks up to him because he saves everyone, and Bakugo admires him because he's the strongest hero. But in the end, they both admire him equally. And it was this admiration towards All Might that helped Bakugo overcome his self-esteem issues at least a little bit, and learn to rely on Deku in order to get closer to his end goal. The realization of what Bakugo really wants is surely a step in the right direction, and keeps Bakugo a little more grounded, but it's not enough to spark a true change. For that, Bakugo needs to actually confront his fears, but he will never do that if he doesn't have any actual reason to. And that's exactly what the next arc is about. First of all, we need to answer an important question. Why did the League of Villains choose to kidnap Bakugo? Why not any other student who would be quieter and more easily to intimidate? Because they only saw Bakugo's strength and his violence. In fact, they saw him just like the audience saw him at the beginning of the series. They saw this angry, overconfident child who desperately wants to win, and thought those qualities would make him a good villain. Let's take a look back at the very beginning of the series. There as well, Bakugo was painted as the antagonist of the series. Funny coincidence, isn't it? Except it's not. By playing into a previous image of Bakugo's character, this scene basically mirrors our thoughts by showing us how we have perceived Bakugo the whole time. And everyone who still saw Bakugo as the typical mean schoolbully who only cares about his superior power was probably expecting him to join the League of Villains, because that is what a typical evil, one-dimensional character would have done in order to strengthen the plot and keep the stakes of the story high. But Bakugo doesn't join the League of Villains. He has a goal and a moral code he's following, and both of these are so deeply ingrained into him that he won't betray them easily. Bakugo does not only want to become the strongest in an abstract sense like the villains thought, he wants to become the strongest hero like All Might. In the latest fight, Bakugo got reminded of his admiration towards All Might, and that is his very reason why he doesn't join the League of Villains. He even says it out loud. I've been won over by the way All Might looks when he wins. You all can say what you want, but nothing can change my mind about that. Notice how he even smiles in that scene. He truly means what he says, and you can see his admiration for All Might in his eyes. This is the scene where even the most stubborn Bakugo hater has to realize that there's much more to Bakugo's character than it initially seems. And the one who loves him and sees potential will begin to feel hopeful, because even though Bakugo struggles with self-worth issues and doesn't know how to express his fear of failure in a healthy way, he still has a strong goal in mind, and by getting reminded once again why that goal is so important to him, he He will now have a chance to reflect on his actions and consider how to approach that goal in a healthy way. After all, Deku has the same goal. How do you completely break a character and make the audience suffer with you? Easy. You give the character a strong goal. You remind them why that goal is important to them. And then you have the character not accomplish that goal. That's exactly what happens with Bakugo and his goal to become the strongest hero like All Might. In fact, it was established very early in the series that Bakugo wants to become the strongest hero. But after being defeated again and again, Bakugo started to lose his goal and his reasons, and only began to focus on winning. But then a spark of hope. Bakugo got reminded why he wants to become a hero and begins to reflect on his morals and actions. Only for All Might to eventually lose his power and therefore destroy the entire image he was in Bakugo's mind and crush everything Bakugo has ever worked for. And as the cherry on top, Bakugo blames himself for it. But let's look into the scene. When the heroes come to save Bakugo, it's no other than All Might who personally comes to the rescue. And upon seeing him, Bakugo is on the verge of tears. Just imagine, the hero you've always been looking up to, the hero who is the embodiment of strength, comes once again to rescue you, just right after you declared that he is everything you look up to. For Bakugo, that must have solidified his admiration for him by 1,000,000 times, because he not only saw in person how All Might managed to save him from the villain's hideout, it was also himself who needed the rescue the most. In that moment, All Might embodied everything Bakugo had ever envisioned, and the fact that he could direct his gratitude for being saved and the relief that this gruesome event is finally over directly to All Might only strengthened his feelings. Because of course Bakugo was scared. He is a 16-year-old boy after all, who was captured by a bunch of villains he knew he had no chance against. But the rescue plan doesn't work, and all of the villains as well as Bakugo get teleported away. And then All for One shows up and delves into a heated battle with All Might. This puts Bakugo in an interesting position, because he knows if he fights now he will hinder All Might in defeating All for One, but he also can't go without fighting since the League of Villains is after him. Bakugo is trapped, unable to do anything. But luckily he gets saved, and this is what we need to talk about. Deku, Todoroki, Kirishima and Momo, who are now in the perfect spot to rescue Bakugo, have to deal with a huge problem. And that is the fact that Bakugo doesn't want to be saved. At least not by someone he sees as inferior to him. After being kidnapped by villains, Bakugo is already in an incredibly vulnerable position, and in his eyes, being rescued would make him sink even lower. The only person he would have wanted to be rescued from is All Might, and he is busy fighting All for One. The only person that could save Bakugo now is one he sees as an equal. Someone he doesn't have a competitive relationship with. And that person is Kirishima. But why Kirishima? So far, we only had little interaction between Bakugo and Kirishima also didn't stand out that much so far. But there is one thing we know, and that is that Kirishima deeply respects Bakugo. Kirishima holds Bakugo in high regard without being too clingy or obsessive. He just respects him for his courage and his ability to stay rational in emotionally charged situations. Bakugo fits exactly Kirishima's definition of manliness. Kirishima is also one of the people that Bakugo confidently won against during the sports festival arc. Therefore, he already has a positive view on him and will be much more likely to let himself get saved by him. And that's exactly what happens. Of course, Bakugo immediately denies all accusations of being saved and states that he only went with them because he was getting in the way of All Might fighting. But for now, everyone is focused on the battle between All Might and All for One, and the inevitable happens. All Might reveals his true form. This entire sequence and reaction were heavily focused on Deku, but we are here for Bakugo, so let's see what he thinks about it. The whole crowd starts cheering for All Might, and Deku and Bakugo join them desperately. In the manga, it's more visible that Deku, as well as Bakugo, have the most emotion within their expression. Even Bakugo has tears in his eyes, pleading for All Might to win. This scene just shows us once again how important All Might is to Bakugo. And even though All Might won the fight and defeated All for One, the fact that he lost his status as the symbol of peace is no longer irreversible. But more importantly, this scene marked the darkest moment of Bakugo's character transformation. This is where Bakugo hit rock bottom. Bakugo's goal, everything he's training for, the symbol that inspired his mindset, gone within an instant. Now Bakugo no longer has someone to look up to anymore. His role model, the symbol of peace, is no longer. But aside from that, Bakugo's narrow-minded worldview becomes his own demise, and he blames himself for All Might's reveal. In Bakugo's eyes, his weakness was the reason for the villains kidnapping him, which ultimately led to All Might having to rescue him and having to fight All for One. Bakugo puts the entire blame on himself. And it doesn't end here. When the dormitory system is introduced, we get to see Bakugo's family and their view on the events for the first time. And what we see is that aggression and abusive behavior seems to run in the family, at least in the mother's side. But aside from that, and the confirmation where Bakugo has his personality from, we also see that Bakugo's mother shares his worldview. If you weren't so weak, you wouldn't have caused so much trouble. This is not what a kid should hear who just got kidnapped and witnessed a traumatizing event. No wonder Bakugo is struggling so much with his self-worth. Aside from that statement, the only positive thing Bakugo's mother had to say about him was about his quirk. Well, she admits that she was a bit worried, but the main focus of that conversation was about Bakugo's bad character traits. And remember, this is only a single snippet from Bakugo's entire family life. Just put yourself in his shoes for a moment. Imagine how you would feel if you were a 16-year-old at a conference with your teachers and your parents start talking shit about you and how ill-mannered you are. Would you be able to stay confident like that? And suddenly, Bakugo's entire character makes a lot of sense. Since he was little, he was only praised for a strong quirk, not his personality, which resulted in Bakugo connecting a sense of self to his quirk and general strength, since he was never taught how to value himself. At this point, you can't help but feel sympathy for him, because suddenly you see his point of view, his struggles, his worries. Bakugo went from the mean bully to a three-dimensional character who has reasons behind his actions. His struggle with his self-worth, him trying to feel superior to others in order to feel more confident, is something a lot of us can relate to. And even if we don't, we're able to understand his actions, because they don't come out of nowhere anymore. We all want to find a place in life, want to figure out who we are, and Bakugo captures this feeling of struggling with your identity in a perfect way, even if we can't relate to his exact situation. At this point in the story, we want to see Bakugo succeed. We want to see him expressing his emotions in a healthy way. We want to see him feeling as a unity among his teammates, being happy the way he is, instead of valuing himself by seeking competition to feel superior. We are rooting for him because we want to see him becoming the best version of himself, because he deserves it. But it would be too easy if Bakugo just realized all his flaws and did a 180-degree turn. That wouldn't be realistic, since Bakugo's messed up worldview is so deeply ingrained within that one external event wouldn't be enough to turn him around. True change comes from within, after all. Therefore, Bakugo continues his life by ignoring his feelings and what his guilt means to him, and continues with his everyday life trying to become stronger. While training their special moves, Bakugo is flawless and talented as always, and even Deku's acquisition of the shoot style only led to Deku getting an even look from Bakugo. Bakugo tries his hardest to let his feelings and guilt not catch up to him, and buries both of them deep within his heart. But of course, it will only be a matter of time until he cracks. And that's where we have to look at the hero license exam. The moment everyone was waiting for is finally here. Bakugo is faced with his biggest fear. He has failed the hero license exam. Bakugo, who out of everyone had the most ambition to become a hero, is the one who falls behind. But as cruel as it sounds, this outcome was inevitable, and was absolutely crucial for Bakugo's character development. Because finally the external circumstances are pushing Bakugo out of his comfort zone, making him realize that he can't go on like he did before, and that he has to change in order to become a hero. This is presented through two scenes during the hero license exam. The first one is Bakugo's fight with Shishikuda. Shishikuda tells him that he won't be able to become a hero with an attitude like that, but Bakugo ignores his words and begins to attack him immediately. That led to Bakugo not seeing Shishikuda's plan and therefore getting captured. But as we know, Bakugo never was a man of words, so it's no surprise that a different strategy is needed in order to make himself reflect. And that is what happens in the second exam, which is focused on evaluating the civilians' grade of injury and helping them accordingly. With Bakugo's impulsive nature and his recklessness, naturally he fails at this part of the exam. And that led to him, one of the top students and most powerful fighting instances at UA, to fail the hero entrance exam. Bakugo failing the exam to become a hero sounds ironic, since it's one of the things he wants most, but it's inevitable, since Bakugo has to learn that the way he thinks he will become a hero is not what reality looks like. A hero is so much more than just being the strongest, and this is the painful moment where his actions catch up to him and he fails. But this time, Bakugo can't blame his defeat on his lack in strength, since strength is not what was needed here. In fact, he is forced to realize that his ignorance to others, and especially those in need, are what ended up making him fail the exam. Now his problem became a reality and is actively affecting his life and his dreams. And this is the moment where he finally decides to take action. But Bakugo is too prideful to just admit his weaknesses, so he looks for a scapegoat to direct his frustration onto. And that is no other than Deku. The fight between Bakugo and Deku is one of the most important scenes in the entire anime, because this fight marks the ultimate turning point for Bakugo. The title of this chapter is called It's About Your Quirk, which in my opinion is really funny and ironic, because this whole confrontation was never about Deku's quirk. Bakugo tries to make himself believe that this is all about Deku, but that is not the truth. The one that Bakugo is confronting here in this scene is actually himself. The scene begins with him and Deku meeting at Grand Beda, where Bakugo not only experienced his first fight against Deku, but also his first loss. And that is the thing that's important to Bakugo. How can he deal with the feeling of unworthiness that he has felt ever since he lost that fight? He starts expressing his anger on Deku getting stronger and stronger with time and now surpassing him by getting his license before him. Deku starts factually explaining how that sudden growth could happen, but that is not what Bakugo wants to hear. Bakugo wants to know why he failed. He comes to the conclusion that Deku's power stems from All Might, which leads to Deku asking him what he's going to do with that information now. Bakugo begins explaining how he, as well as Deku, always looked up to All Might and aspired to be like him. And now, the one person he never saw as a threat is acknowledged by his idol. But Bakugo's focus is not really on how Deku managed to get that acknowledgement, it's more on why he himself didn't. Were his admirations, his strength not enough? Bakugo never really was a man of words, so he tries to find his answer by physically fighting Deku in an attempt to test him to see if he really has what it takes. At least that's what Bakugo tells himself. But the reality is that he just doesn't know how to express his anger, his frustration, his pain, so he turns to fighting. And Deku immediately recognizes that and has no intent in fighting him. In fact, he tries to help him. And that's when Bakugo breaks. His final attempt to hide his feeling fails, and through a very emotional speech, which was, by the way, executed perfectly by his voice actor,
大丈夫戦えよなんだよクソ雑魚のてめえが力をつけて俺はオールマイトを終わらせちまってんだ
Bakugo finally admits that he was blaming himself for All Might's end, followed by the very powerful statement, I have no idea what I should do. And that last sentence is in fact the whole essence of his character. Bakugo looks for an answer to deal with his emotions. Due to his upbringing, he was never taught how to express feelings like self-doubt, nor did he learn how to deal with failure. And all of that is now catching up to him, and he is so frustrated because he just doesn't know where he should direct his feelings to. And at this point in the story, we finally have to take a closer look at Deku, and especially at his relationship with Bakugo, because the way this scene is executed is absolutely beautiful, and Deku plays a huge role in it. Because at this point in the story, there is no one who is better matched right now than Deku. Deku knows Bakugo long enough to know how he is feeling right now, and due to his naturally empathy, knows exactly how he has to act in order to let Bakugo express his feelings. In fact, Deku is actually the only person that Bakugo can direct his anger onto, because Deku knows that this isn't about him. He can read between the lines and knows what Bakugo actually needs. And he not only does that in the scene, in fact, he knew it the whole time. Ever since he met Bakugo, Deku knew what Bakugo actually needed, but due to his ego and inferiority complex, Bakugo never listened to him. And that is actually one of the reasons why Bakugo always hated Deku. Not because Deku was so much physically weaker than him, but because Deku knew exactly what Bakugo always tried to hide and that scared him, because he didn't want to be confronted with his feelings. And he goes on by finally telling Deku that he hated the look in Deku's eyes because it made him feel inferior. And just the fact that he shared his view on the things is so important, because that's the first step in the right direction that will help Bakugo acquire a healthy view on the world. After that statement, Deku is shocked, because in Deku's eyes, it never was that way. Deku has always looked up to Bakugo, calling him an amazing person who was even closer to me than All Might. This is really important, because in Bakugo's eyes, Deku has always looked down on him because he saw him as inferior by worrying about him. But now Bakugo is realizing that this was never the case, that Deku instead heavily looked up to him. And this is the exact thing that Bakugo needs to realize. That needing help won't make him weaker than anyone else. The fight between the two continues and ends with Bakugo winning, coming out on top. That's when All Might interferes and stops them from fighting. Bakugo immediately turns to All Might and finally confesses his true feelings, stating that he's weak and that he blames himself for All Might turning out like this. All Might finally realizes how much Bakugo pressured himself at such a young age. He states that it's not Bakugo's fault and admits that Bakugo is strong, but that strength alone is not enough to become a hero. Both the goal to win and the goal to save people is what makes a hero, and All Might suggests that if both Deku and Bakugo learn from each other what they are missing, they both would become excellent heroes. Meaning Bakugo has the strength and will to win needed, but lacks the urge to save people, and Deku has the will to save people but lacks the urge to win. Both could have the ability to bring out the best in each other and become amazing heroes instead of tearing each other down. Both of them are still not that convinced what to think of that, but the fact alone that Bakugo managed to finally express his feelings and his struggles is a huge step in the right direction. Because the thing that Bakugo desperately needed to hear was not that he was strong, but that his feelings matter. Bakugo says that this is not what he wanted to hear. Well, this isn't what he wanted to hear, but what he needed to hear. And in the next scene, it's clear that he took All Might's words to heart. Because by saying, if you've got the strongest person helping you out, you can't be losing, Bakugo cares for Deku's feelings for the first time, and mocks him a bit by saying that since he already has the chance to become the strongest, he should use it. This is the first time in the series where Bakugo treats Deku as an equal, and it's the turning point and start for Bakugo's character growth in the story. And also, from a viewer's point, this scene was fantastic. In fact, it probably was this moment that made a lot of people absolutely love Bakugo. The emotion in his voice is absolutely heartbreaking and carried that scene perfectly. It was just so incredibly rewarding to see Bakugo finally admitting his feelings and being open to different views and opinions than just his own. Just compare this Bakugo to the one that advised Deku to jump from the roof of the school building. Bakugo became so much more self-reflective and aware of his actions. And because we as the audience knew about Bakugo's struggles and his burden before, it was so rewarding to finally see him addressing them instead of hiding them away. This is exactly the kind of character growth we want to see in a character, and therefore it's no surprise that Bakugo won our hearts with that speech and became the most popular character from now on. Bakugo's first character arc is now completed. He faced his struggles, his insecurities, he escaped his narrow-minded mindset that caused him to only focus on winning, and slowly begins accepting Deku as an equal rival instead of an inferior peril on the road. But Bakugo's character development is still not over yet, because now he has to implement All Might's win to save and save to win speech and focus more on saving, whereas Deku needs to focus more on winning. From now on, this speech guides Bakugo's character to reach his full potential and will accompany him doing anything he does. There are actually quite a few scenes in the next arc that focus on Bakugo saving people in order to win, instead of not acknowledging the needs of others. I won't go into much detail since we still have quite a bit to cover, and I don't want this video to end up being 2 hours long. One of those scenes takes place during the hero license exam for Bakugo, Todoroki, Inasa, and Kami. During this arc, they are met with an interesting task, but Bakugo especially. They are assigned to win the hearts of the children, meaning Bakugo's usual strategy to fight his way through won't work here. After they've successfully managed to win the hearts of the children by creating a playground for them, only the self-assigned leader of the group won't play with them. He thinks he's better than all of them, and this arrogance reminds Bakugo of his old self. This causes him to self-reflect, and he gives the boy the following advice. If all you ever do is look down on people, you won't be able to recognize your own weaknesses. The kid realizes how genuine Bakugo's advice sounds, which touches his heart. The interesting thing here is that Bakugo managed to convey him with his words, not with his actions like he usually does. During this arc, Bakugo realizes once again that violence is not always the answer, and in order to get the license and become a hero, he needs to work with others, in this case Todoroki, Inasa, and Kami, in order to achieve his personal goal. And he would have never done that if the failed exam before didn't make him painfully realize that his own ego and pride were standing in his way of becoming a hero. This is what he meant by that quote and why it's so important to him. Another example would be Bakugo playing the drums at the school festival. And even though that's not an actual fight, All Might's save to win quote is still applicable here. In the beginning, Bakugo seems like he doesn't want to participate in the school festival by calling the so-called stress relief program pure self-gratification. But then he states that he hates how the other departments are looking down on them, and just pleasing their feelings and luring them in won't do nothing. Instead, they have to show them that they are capable on their own and that Bakugo will treat this as a battle. This perspective becomes even more obvious when we remind ourselves that it was Bakugo who was kidnapped by the villains, and these feelings of guilt bother him of course in the long run. In this case, Bakugo's pride to win and assert himself is actually beneficial for the whole class. Bakugo has something to prove now, so he will do his best to cooperate with others in order to achieve his personal goals. The final and most obvious instance of Bakugo's character growth would be the moment during the training with Class B, where he saves Jiro from Togaru's attack. This doesn't go unnoticed, and while the rest of Class B is shocked, Class A is absolutely amazed at Bakugo's ability to teamwork and how he has changed. Bakugo doesn't want to admit that he has changed, claiming that his goal to be the #1 hero still remains the same. While this is true and Bakugo's goal of winning remains the same, he now has implemented All Might's save to win and works with his teammates together to achieve a flawless victory. Bakugo's pride won't allow him to acknowledge his change yet, but his actions definitely speak louder than any words ever could. Apart from these scenes that focus entirely on Bakugo's character development, Bakugo's and Deku's relationship also begins to improve. Since their fight on ground better, they now share the secret of One for All. Although Bakugo acts like he still can't stand Deku, he actually cares about him and is interested in the way that power works. Bakugo's goal to become the strongest hero and surpass All Might remains the same, but since Deku is the one who has All Might's power now, Bakugo begins to see Deku as the one he's competing against and his measurement for his success. Therefore, Bakugo is interested in Deku getting stronger, because he should use that power that All Might gave him so Bakugo can defeat him one day and therefore become the strongest hero. Another reason for Bakugo suddenly tolerating and helping Deku is Bakugo's view on power. He still values and respects huge strength, and especially All Might's, so in his eyes it would be a total waste to give someone that power who can deal with it. Therefore, Bakugo wants to help Deku make the best of this power, because it will also help him to become the strongest hero. But even though Bakugo's values may have changed, his personality hasn't, so he still mocks Deku. But now he does that more in a rivalry, encouraging way, not out of a feeling of pure hatred. A good example for this growth would be the conversation between him, Deku, and All Might, where Bakugo clearly is interested in the incident that happened with One for All, not out of jealousy, but a genuine interest. He begins to mock Deku because seemingly he can't control his powers anymore, and begins to talk about how much stronger he's gotten in order to intimidate Deku more. But Deku doesn't let himself be intimidated by Bakugo anymore, and is actually uplifted and motivated by Bakugo's words. In this scene, Bakugo's and Deku's relationship is much healthier than before, since both of them can finally have a conversation that's eye to eye. During the beginning of the pre-final war arc, Bakugo was more or less absent, and also in earlier scenes he wasn't as much in the spotlight as before. This is only natural, since he hasn't gotten into much actual conflicts after his change and correction of his worldview, but still, there's one scene we need to talk about. And that is the flashback of Bakugo's conversation with All Might during Deku's fight with Shigaraki. But in order to understand why that flashback is so important, we first have to focus on the fact that there's a flashback in the first place. Because usually, a flashback like that in a heated fight scene that doesn't even concern any of the fighting characters is not the best narrative design you could use regarding the pacing. Flashbacks or other big changes in the continuation of the story always disrupt the flow, and could kill any suspense that has been built in an instant. Therefore, it's always extremely risky to use flashbacks, and they should be only used if they truly enhance the story. But even though this seems like the worst possible timing for a flashback, in this case it's actually genius, because by that, the story plays with our understanding of the genre. It's no secret that there's often a flashback right before something tragic happens to a character. After all, a flashback is able to convey emotions that would have went missing otherwise. And even though it works, it's also the first indicator that something bad will happen. And since the bad event is already anticipated, the emotional value from it is low. But in this case, the story uses our knowledge of the genre to fool us completely. So let's see how that works. First of all, it may be interesting to know that during the fight in this chapter, there was a great emphasis on the emotional expressions of the characters, more than the fighting action itself. Both Bakugo and Endeavor watch the fight with anticipation, but whereas Endeavor looks more mad and concerned, Bakugo actually looks really anxious. And this anxious expression is the last thing we see before the flashback begins. It starts with a very light-hearted scene where Ochako, Flappy and Zero help Deku control his freshly discovered quirks. That scene skips to Bakugo and All Might, who watch Deku from afar. The conversation between the two begins not that dramatic, but then it suddenly takes a turn into a different direction. When Bakugo admits that he's concerned for Bakugo's and Deku's growth, Bakugo begins reminiscing about his behavior towards Deku in the past years. He begins by stating that Deku doesn't realize how special he is, and that used to annoy Bakugo, so he wanted to keep his distance. He pushed back his own feelings of weakness and began bullying Deku. All Might then compares him to Endeavor, who also wants to atone for his sins, which All Might relates to Bakugo now helping Deku to grow. Then All Might suddenly ends the conversation and says that there will come a time where they will talk about that again. The scene skips back to the present and we are in the middle of the fight again. The last chapter ends with Deku realizing that his last hits were not enough, and that he now has to risk everything to take Shigaraki down, whatever the consequences are. Now, what was the reason for that flashback? It seemingly didn't have any impact on the current present of all the characters, nor gave us this vital information about Deku's power that we didn't already know. At the first glance, this flashback seems to be so out of place that it ruins everything. But in fact, there's one scene within that flashback that not only raises the stakes, but also is crucial to the character's development of two characters. And that is the scene where Bakugo admits he was bullying Deku. But why? Oh, why was this scene put in the middle of a fight scene? Why was that incredibly important conversation not given a proper scene? Because this scene serves as a means to enhance the tension of the current fight. This stems from the simple fact that the person who should receive Bakugo's words is not All Might but Deku. And Bakugo will only be able to tell that Deku if Deku survives the fight. Adding the fact that Deku plans to go all out in the last panel is proof enough that the stakes of the story are currently really high. The audience already knows that something bad is going to happen, and they think it will happen to Deku. But if we look at the next chapter, which by the way has the beautiful title Katsuki Bakugo Rising, we see that it's Bakugo who sacrifices himself for Deku by letting him get impaled by All for One's quirk in order to protect Deku. At this point of the story, the ultimate definition of All Might's quote, "save to win," is now achieved. Because the person Bakugo is saving here is Deku, and he does that not to win for himself, but to win in general. Whereas the spark of Bakugo's character development was the chapter titled Katsuki Bakugo Origin, this one is called Katsuki Bakugo Rising, which not only physically shows his character development in him literally rising to action, but also metaphorically means that Bakugo is finally on the right path and makes the right decisions. His quote, "At that moment, without thinking, my body simply moved on its own," is also a beautiful parallel to Deku's exact same words when he saved Bakugo for the first time way back in chapter 1. Back then, no one would have imagined that Bakugo would one day save Deku, but he did. Bakugo managed to conquer his fears, change his mindset regarding his definition of winning, and establish his relationship with Deku in a healthy way. Bakugo changed. And this scene depicts beautifully how his changed mindset led to actually changes in his behavior. So now, Bakugo at least opened up to All Might about his actual feelings, and showed Deku that he cared for him. But there's one last single thing that still needs to be done, and that is Bakugo having a proper conversation with Deku. The fight between Deku and Class A was actually set up in a really beautiful way, with everyone trying to save Deku and remember nice things he did for them and the impression he left on everyone. It starts with minor things, like Deku helping Jiro structure notes, and gets more and more personal with each character. And the last person who confronts Deku is no other than Bakugo. And we really have to take a closer look at that scene, because the way Bakugo's apology is presented is really unique and holds a lot of symbolism. The scene begins with Bakugo reminding Deku of his last words before he was impaled by Shigaraki. Don't even think about winning this alone, and that he knew he needed to tell Deku these words. This quote is quite interesting because it not only serves as a comparison between Deku risking everything while fighting Shigaraki at his current state now, not accepting the help of everyone. No, this quote can also be assigned to Bakugo, who embodied that exact mindset the whole time. Him speaking these words out loud while redirecting their meaning to himself is literally a verbal confirmation of his changed self. Bakugo then begins to explain how he has felt regarding Deku. He states that Deku was always far behind him, but for Bakugo it felt like he was miles ahead of him. During that quote, the flashback of Deku helping Bakugo after he fell into the creek is shown. But let's talk about that quote. Because why would Bakugo suddenly feel like Deku was miles ahead of him when he was always behind him? Well, both of these statements refer to different things. The quote about Bakugo feeling like Deku was behind him refers to Deku's physical strength and the fact that he had no quirk. On the other hand, the quote about Deku being miles ahead of him refers to Deku's emotional state and his ability to confront and reflect on his own weaknesses. That's why the background of Deku helping Bakugo is a perfect fit, because in this scene Deku sees Bakugo needing help, while Bakugo himself doesn't want to admit that. Bakugo continues by saying how he hated that feeling, and that he didn't want to recognize that, and that's the reason why he bullied Deku. In short, Bakugo hated how Deku was always able to face his emotions while he himself couldn't, and how Deku was able to recognize exactly that. Bakugo continues by stating how nothing went as he planned to when he entered UA and ends his monologue with an apology by calling him Izuku. But aside from that, the scene is even greater because of the unique way it's presented. During this scene, we see Bakugo and Izuku from different stages of their life. When Bakugo states how he hated the feeling of Izuku being miles ahead of him, he didn't want to feel like, nor recognize it, the two are depicted as little kids. This portrayal intensifies the dialogue since the emphasis on Bakugo's raw, unfiltered feelings literally stem out of this phase of his life. Bakugo's inner child is talking here. When Bakugo states how he tried to show superiority over Izuku, the image depicts Bakugo and Izuku from middle school. And we remember the scene from the first episode where Bakugo tried everything to show Izuku how weak he was and how strong and so much better Bakugo himself was. The scene changes again, and now we see the two in their UA school uniforms. Bakugo realizes that nothing went as he thought it would, remember UA Sports Festival for example, and that he spent all of his days trying to figure out Izuku's strengths and weaknesses. The scene reverts back to the present time, and Bakugo concluded the words, "It probably doesn't mean anything telling you all this, but that's what I really think. Izuku, I'm sorry for everything I've done until now." And by that, with that apology, Bakugo's character arc is officially concluded. From this point on, there is nothing that Bakugo still needs to do or needs to realize in order to become a well-rounded character. Of course, there are still some things that could be more fleshed out or shown, but all in all, his character arc is finished. And yes, I'm aware of the things that have happened in the manga regarding his character, but they are not exactly crucially needed for his character development. But let's go back to my initial question. Why is Bakugo such a popular character? After watching this video, you surely have formed an opinion about that in your mind, but let me provide you with a simple answer. Bakugo is so popular because he is human. The way he acts is realistic, and his reasons for his actions are relatable. Everyone knows the feeling of not being enough and struggling with your self-worth. Everyone can identify with that. But that kind of feeling is so personal and so internal that it's often shown externally as something entirely different. Anger, for example, or hate. And when you see a person being mad or hateful, you might not immediately think that they might be struggling with their self-worth. But in Bakugo's case, it's perfectly clear that his anger and hate is just a cover-up for his actual feelings. And by that, he becomes very easy to grasp. Bakugo manages to visualize such complex human emotion and its consequences in such an understandable way. And that is the reason why Bakugo is such a great character. And with that, my video comes to an end. If you've actually watched that until the end, I couldn't be happier. If you've liked this video and want to see more video essays on your favorite My Hero Academia characters, or maybe different anime, consider following me. And if you've liked this video and can take away the one or the other thing, I would appreciate a click on the like button. Thank you everyone, and see you hopefully next time.